And I would be really remiss if I didn't point out, this is a big one here. There have been theories that in fact Nick, the main character there, that he is actually gay, and that his admiration for Jay Gatsby and the friendship that they form, that it is in fact a sublimated, or erotic fascination and a genuine sense of affectionate sexual love. And yeah, one of the arguments made that is that, well, that Nick is unreliable as a narrator because Gatsby's a criminal. To which I'm like, well, that's a very purist interpretation, right? The whole point of the story there was that, yeah, he did criminal things in order to get rich so he could get the love of his life back. He was a naive dreamer who did some bad things. And did he kill people? Yeah, he fought in the war. As for after that, yeah, rumor had it that he'd killed people. It was part of his legend, or killed a man. To which Gatsby, when Nick mentioned it to him, he's like, just one? Right? And my understanding was, in the context here, it's like, yeah, the guy went and fought in World War One. He led an offensive of his unit. He was looking to die after he got the Dear John letter from Daisy. But instead, they ended up securing a victory, and he got all these medals pinned on him. And yeah, so calling him unreliable, I thought, well, all of that just makes the story not even about the story at all. It's now just this hidden message and so forth. And yeah, and I mention this in the context of the apartment there because that whole scene is considered evidence that Nick is in fact gay. Because the party wraps up after Tom punches Myrtle in the nose to silence her because she has had a bit to drink and she keeps yelling about Daisy, right? You won't leave Daisy. You won't leave Daisy. And Tom is saying, stop mentioning my wife's name. Keep my wife's name out your damn mouth. And she persists, and he punches her in the nose and breaks it, thus demonstrating what a piece of shit he is, and that also that he is physically abusive. And so the party is like, it's off, and a couple that is there that he was talking to, the wife stays behind to console and help Myrtle with her nose, as does someone else. Uh, Tom, I believe he just kind of, I'm not sure if he hangs back or takes off, whatever. But Nick is now on his own, and he helps the husband of the woman helping her. Can't remember their names. He's helping him back to his apartment, and there is a bit of a bit of time skips. It's disjointed, and some people have ventured that those time skips are actually Fitzgerald's way of saying, stuff happened, and there are a few what seem to be like symbolic references there. Like the guy invites Nick to lunch in the city whenever, which I'm told was interpreted as an invite to a nooner. And then they're riding the elevator down, like the very next scene after they're leaving, they're in the elevator, and the elevator attendant tells the guy, don't touch the lever, please. And he's like, oh, I wasn't aware I was. That was seen as an indication that he's suggestively fondling a phallic symbol. And then, pause. Ah, forgiveness, please. Multiple interruptions there. Anyway, as I was saying, I believe I left off with the elevator scene. And then, yes, again, there's a time jump where we now see Nick sitting beside the bed of Mr. So-and-so. He's lying in bed in his pajamas, apparently, and he is reading to him from pictures that he took. So there, too, it's like the assumption is they just had sex, and he's reading the photographs. Now, alternately, though, what I have read about, what I was led to believe there, is that, in fact, the symbolism here and the time jumps are not alluding to anything sexual. They are, in fact, they are in keeping with Fitzgerald's style, right? He really did love to explore memories and dreams, or perception. That is very much a modernist thing. So, in fact, the fact that Nick was experiencing sort of these blackouts of sorts, right? This is showing his recollection of the events, because all of this is being told past tense. And this was, as he said in the book, Nick has only been drunk twice in his life, and this party was the second time. So, in fact, yeah, the fact that his recollection is spotty makes sense. And yeah, and as for the seeing that symbolism, the nooner, the suggestively fondling, that just seemed like, if we assume this, then yeah, suddenly that seems like an indication. But the part where he's sitting by the guy's bed, that requires a bit more explanation. But as is would seem pretty clear based on the symbolist reading of it, and this is not my interpretation here. This is something I read. It is in fact the photographs that this man is sharing with Nick. They are of different scenes in New York. This is something that he does. He's a hobbyist photographer. And yeah, the scenes he's describing, though, are symbolic of the story's events. It's like they've got the old workhorse, is one of the photos he mentions, which is a reference to the guy who runs the auto shop there, the guy whose wife, Myrtle, is fooling around on him. Beauty and the Beast, Tom and Myrtle. And there's more. There's a fourth, I think. But yeah, the last, he says Brooklyn Bridge, as in Brooklyn Bridge, but he sort of screws up the pronunciation. But no, he's basically saying Broken Bridge, as in where Tom punched the lovely Myrtle and broke her nose. And so, yeah, that is characterizing everything that's happened so far. As for why this guy's in his pajamas and Nick is sitting there while the guy's very, very drunk, probably wanted to go to sleep, but in keeping with Nick being this total pushover, he asked him to stay while he showed him his photographs. And so, yeah, Nick is just doing that. And then, furthermore, Nick then is like falling asleep at the train station, but takes it and gets home. Yeah, all of this is very much in keeping with Fitzgerald's style, and Nick's sort of the fact that he's such a non-judgmental pushover type. I mean, that's what basically brought him into the city with Tom in the first place there to see his mistress. And yeah, and it's like, but above all else, it's, to me, why this theory fails is not because of, anything that's in these scenes per se, but the fact that it renders the entire point of the book null and void. Right? The entire point was that Nick, being this unjudgmental outsider, he comes in, he sees all this stuff, and he transitions into becoming a judgmental person, or at least a person who's got judgments to say about the rich folk, his cousin, her asshole husband, and all these rich people who really didn't give two shits about the fact that Gatsby was murdered and couldn't even be bothered to attend the funeral. And yeah, and the bootlegging, it's like, yeah, Gatsby did all that, but the point is that this is how that's another thing, right? It's like, this is how rich people in America got rich in the first place, right? The blue bloods who inherited their wealth, they love to pretend that this was hard work and sacrifice and ingenuity and innovation, when in fact it's like, no, behind every story behind every great rich rise to power is a great crime. It may not have been illegal, but it was still a crime, right? Henry Ford treated his workers like crap. He stole ideas from others and streamlined them to make more cars, and initially he was happy paying his workers subsistence pay and employing automation in the factory to cut overhead costs. He only started paying them a living wage and a decent wage and shorter hours because he realized his bottom line depended on it. He's no hero, no innovator. And the Rockefellers, they got rich off of the Civil War. They were essentially war profiteers. And the Kennedys, yep, Dad got rich on bootlegging, sent all his kids to private schools and so forth. They went on to become a political dynasty. The Bushes, rich off of oil wealth. All, all of this came down to either warfare, uh, an actual illegal crime, or land theft and resource exploitation, right? The the conquest and the genocide of America, right? This is how fortunes were made. It's how the Blue Bloods were established. And to quote A Knight's Tale, right? How did aristocrats become aristocrats? They got it at the point of a sword, right? They murdered their way into aristocracy and then they just passed it down from generation to generation, right? It's like, yes, absolutely, this is how elites and aristocrats exist. They're not smarter than anyone, they're not better than anyone, they're not the ones who are just working harder and are more diligent. No, they cut corners, they did ruthless things, they did all manner of criminal enterprises in order to become wealthy. Not all these crimes were illegal at the time, but that only reflected what a really crappy, horrible time it was. Anyway, diatribe complete. So yeah, I've never put much stock in that interpretation, mainly because it's like, well, if Nick's no longer reliable, if Gatsby's actually like the bad guy here and got what he deserved, then absolutely nothing about what Fitzgerald was saying about the rich and the leisure class applies. It's just a story about a clandestine a man who is gay and is closeted about that given the nature of the time, and he's completely misreading the situation and misjudging everything based on his bias, to which I say that destroys the story completely, and all for the sake of what I would consider, because in debating this with some people, I was accused of being a homophobe. Much in the same way as I was accused of being a homophobe for not believing in the very scant, like really undocumented, unevidenced theory that Shakespeare was gay. And it's like, that's one I heard of, and it's based on just this most meager of evidence. And personally, I've always found those kind of theories, outing historical figures as homophobic, because people are acting like, oh, that's scandalous, It's like, oh, please. It's like literary figures from history, such as Oscar Wilde, Walt Whitman, Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen, whose are characters I will be, not characters, real historical figures, but they're fictionalized in the Regeneration series, which I'm going to be covering soon. Yeah, these individuals, they were all gay, and we know this because it's like it wasn't entirely a secret. Um, whether or not it was something that they kept hidden or just sort of slightly under wraps in their time, it didn't matter. The evidence was there. The indications were there. It was in their art, in their lives, and also in the case of Oscar Wilde, right, in his ultimate fate, which was very tragic, right? He was outed, and yeah, it's not like people didn't know in the first place, but when it became public, suddenly it was an issue. Yeah, so it's like as much as people may feel like this is something for advocacy, acknowledging authors and works of literature that explore this sort of thing. I can certainly understand why people would want to do that, but it's like not at the expense of historical or literary accuracy. And yes, to which In fact, if I do think I should review Cryptonomicon, right? Because that contains Alan Turing written into fiction. Alan Turing, there is no indication that he was on the spectrum, that he was ASD. That is something that, yeah, but ASD advocates, parents who have children who are autistic, that are on the spectrum, they really love that idea because it's an accomplished individual. Oh, another example of a historical figure who was gay, and we know because even though it was a time when you didn't reveal that about yourself, it did come out. And in Alan Turing's case, that is information he volunteered, which was very interesting, you know? Yeah. But yes, that makes me want to review Cryptonomicon. Anyway, all that is just the alternate interpretation there, one of several. And so Great Gatsby is, in fact, a worthwhile read, even though, on a first read, it does come across as sort of a boring story, not a lot of there, but it's only really if you don't incorporate that, you don't understand the fact that this is an indictment on the American dream. It's an indictment on the wealthy and the leisure class. And it is part of a big historic constellation of books that explore that basically take that very popular, enduring myth and say, and says, bullshit. It's like, yeah, the American dream, as George Carlin would say, they call it the American dream because you'd have to be asleep to believe it. And yeah, so this is definitely worthy of read in that respect. And I hope anyone who's considering reading it, who may actually coincidentally, by some weird, unstatistically likely twist of fate, sees this video, that that sort of primer, what I've said, helps. Because in fact, a student told me this. The year after I taught this book to a class of two classes of grade 11 English students, I came back to the same school as a on-call teacher, and in fact, I filled in there, and I knew the students were reading this, and I told them all about the symbolism and stuff. And a student later told me that they were not enjoying the book at all. It didn't make really any sense to them, but once I told them about that stuff, they were actually starting to get it. So I really took that to heart. I thought, oh, good to be helping here. This is what education is. It's what it's supposed to be, right? And yeah, so for modernist literature, just exposing your kids to it can be really hit and miss. It's like, before you read this, understand what you're getting into, right? Because the words on the page are not always that is not always the point of the book here. If you go by those, you may miss this underlying message. And that was certainly the case with me with James Joyce at first, right? First few short stories of his I read, I did not understand the true aim of them. But once it was made clear what he'd go for, what his tendencies were, suddenly every story of his that I read made perfect sense. And it was like, cool. That guy was actually really brilliant. Anyway, once again, interruption, I gotta go. So thanks for tuning in, and see you again soon.